The final part of chapter 9, this section is called The Denial of Change. In 1865, a newspaper editor told his readers that well-informed people know that it is impossible to transmit the voice over wires, and that were it possible to do so, the thing would be of no practical value. Barely a decade later, the telephone erupted from Mr. Bell's laboratory and changed the world. On the very day that the Wright brothers took wing, newspapers refused to report the event because their sober, solid, feet-on-the-ground editors simply could not bring themselves to believe that it had happened. After all, a famous American astronomer, Simon Newcomb, had not long before assured the world that no possible combination of known substances, known forms of machinery, and known forms of force can be united in a practical machine by which man shall fly long distances. Not long after this, another expert announced publicly that it was nothing less than feeble-mindedness to expect anything to come of the horseless carriage movement. 6 years later, the 1 millionth Ford rolled off an assembly line. And then there was the great Rutherford himself, the discoverer of the atom, who said in 1933 that the energy in the atom's nucleus would never be released. 9 years later, the first chain reaction. Again and again, the human brain, including the first-class scientific brain, has blinded itself to the novel possibilities of the future, has narrowed its field of concern to gain monetary reassurance, only to be rudely shaken by the accelerative thrust. This is not to imply that all of the scientific or technological advances so far discussed in this book will necessarily materialise. Still less does it imply that they will all occur between now and the turn of the century. Some may represent blind alleys, others will succeed in the lab but turn out to be impractical for one reason or another. Yet all this is unimportant, for even if none of these developments occur, others will, perhaps even more unsettling will. We have scarcely touched on the computer revolution and the far ramifying changes that must follow in its churning wake. We have barely mentioned the implications of the thrust into outer space, an adventure that could, before the new millennium arrives, change all of our lives and attitudes in radical and as yet unpredicted ways. What would happen, for example, if an astronaut or space vehicle returned to Earth contaminated with some fast-multiplying, death-dealing microorganism? We have said nothing about the laser, the holograph, the powerful new instruments of personal and mass communication, the new technologies of crime and espionage, new forms of transport and construction, the developing horror of chemical and bacteriological warfare techniques, the radiant promise of solar energy, the coming discovery of life in a test tube, the startling new tools and techniques for education, and an endless list of other fields in which high-impact changes lie just ahead. In the coming decades, advances in all of these fields will fire off like a series of rockets, carrying us out of the past, plunging us deeper into the new society. Nor will this new society quickly settle into a steady state. It too will quiver and crack and roar as it suffers jolt after jolt of high energy change. For the individual who wishes to live in his time, to be a part of the future, the super-industrial revolution offers no cessation from change. It offers no return to the familiar past. It offers only the highly combustible mixture of transience and novelty. This massive injection of speed and novelty into the fabric of society will force us not merely to cope more rapidly with familiar situations, events and moral dilemmas, but to cope at a progressively faster rate with situations that are, for us, decidedly unfamiliar, first time situations, strange, irregular, unpredictable. This will significantly alter the balance that prevails in any society between the familiar and unfamiliar elements in the daily life of its people, between the routine and the non-routine, the predictable and the unpredictable. The relationship between these two kinds of daily life elements can be called the novelty ratio of the society, and as the level of newness or novelty rises, less and less of life appears subject to our routine forms of coping behaviour. More and more, there is a growing weariness and wariness, a pall of pessimism, a decline in our sense of mastery. More and more, the environment comes to seem chaotic, beyond human control. Thus, two great social forces converge. The relentless movement towards transience is reinforced and made more potentially dangerous by a rise in the novelty ratio. Nor, as we shall see next, is the novelty to be found solely in the technological arrangements of the society to be. In its social arrangements too, we can anticipate the unprecedented, the unfamiliar, the bizarre. End of chapter 9.